Next, we want to expand our view beyond our own home galaxy and think about the universe as a whole. In the entire universe, we estimate about 100 billion galaxies. Now, this number might be off by a factor of 2 or 3. So maybe there's 200 billion galaxies. But the way I always remember it is by the order of magnitude here. So about 100 billion galaxies. And on average, each galaxy contains about 100 billion stars. Now, we've already encountered the sizes of 2 galaxies that were larger than that. The Milky Way was about a 250 billion star galaxy, and the Andromeda is about 1 trillion stars. So clearly there are galaxies bigger than that. But there are also many galaxies smaller than them, and on average it's about 100 billion stars. So if you put those 2 pieces of information together, that there are about 100 billion stars in each galaxy on average, and 100 billion galaxies in the universe, there are estimated 10 to the 22 stars in this universe. And so I've written the number out here so that we can appreciate how large this is. 10 to the 22 stars that are out there. So you can see the number and imagine how big the universe really is. But another way to think of it is that if you lived for 100 years and every second of your life you went to visit a different star, like you were in a spaceship and 1/1000 you could be at a new star, 1/1000 you're at a new star, you would only get to see 3,155,760,000 stars, because on average a person lives for that many seconds. And that would only be 0.000000003% of the stars in the universe. If you started out in the Milky Way and you were only looking at stars in our own galaxy, you would just get to about 1% of the stars in the Milky Way alone. So I just want you to appreciate when we talk about how big the universe is, what that really means. It means that in a human lifetime, you could not even really explore our own galaxy, let alone the other 100 billion galaxies out there. There's a lot out there to look at. Now, the person who's most responsible for our expanded view of the universe is Edwin Hubble. And he did that by making observations that took us outside of the Milky Way. Now, at the time, it was just assumed that we were all part of the same galaxy. But he was measuring Cepheid variables, which we've already talked about, that they are standard candles. They can be used to determine distance because their pulsation rate is constant. And related to that, we can determine their luminosity. And once you know the luminosity of an object, you can compare it to its apparent magnitude and figure out how far away it is. So he was identifying these Cepheid variable stars. He measured their distance, and they were huge. They had to be far outside of our own galaxy. There was no other consequence that made sense. And so one of them, which was originally M31, M was for Messier. He had a catalog of these odd objects in the sky that weren't stars. N31 became the Andromeda Galaxy. And we began to identify that some of these little points of light, they weren't stars, obviously, and they also weren't inside the Milky Way. They were outside of the Milky Way. As pictures began to get better, we could also start distinguishing the types, as we've talked about, the barred and unbarred spirals, the ellipticals, the irregulars. I also mentioned in the previous video the small and large Magellanic Clouds, which are other galaxies in our local group with Milky Way and Andromeda, and they're visible from the southern hemisphere. So these are these fuzzy spots in the sky they're two irregular galaxies. Hubble was able to image and catalog many, many different galaxies that were visible with the present telescope technology, and determine their distance and start to map out the actual universe as a whole. He also invented the categorization scheme, the classification scheme. There are subcategories which are labeled in this diagram. I'm not that concerned with you knowing them, so you can just think of the three broad types: the spirals, the ellipticals, the irregulars, and then distinguishing between barred and unbarred spiral. But to know that there are subclassifications that astronomers study and are of things of interest, like why are there different amounts of spiral arms, and some look like this and others look like this? How do the bars form? These are all open questions in astronomy that scientists are trying to understand a little bit better. But Hubble first classified them and gave us the understanding that there are a sea of galaxies out there in the universe, and they come in lots of different types. Okay, so this last table here gives you the basic data on each of the types of galaxies that we've identified. Typical masses, so you can compare their size. Ellipticals, big range in the elliptical galaxies. Irregulars, they can be smaller than spirals or bigger. They can be sort of similar range, but maybe not quite as big, but they could also be smaller. In terms of their size, they're a little bit more constrained. Ellipticals, again, always have the biggest range in these numbers. They can be 3,000 light years or 700,000 light years. In terms of luminosity, irregulars are the dimmest. The spirals and ellipticals tend to be brighter. Populations of stars, ellipticals are old. Irregulars can be old and young. Spirals can be old and young. Ellipticals tend to just be old. And then interstellar matter, sort of what's in between the stars. Gas and dust. In the ellipticals, there's almost no dust. The dust has been used up, which makes sense if they're old stars. In irregulars, you can have a mixture. Some can have little dust, some can have a lot. Mass to light ratio is how much matter is in the galaxy relative to how much light it's putting out. And see a variation here. The largest tends to be for the ellipticals. They have a lot. They're a bit bigger, but they don't necessarily put out as much light, so their mass to light ratio is higher. All right, so we can see that there's some distinctions between the different types of galaxies. The main distinction that you need to know is the shape. So if you see a picture, you can tell, oh, that's a spiral, that's an elliptical, that's irregular.